Hi there, Simon here, data storyteller on the team, and welcome to another video. Let me start off by showing you something real quick. I'm wondering, what are your immediate reactions when you see this? I'm guessing that in most cases it's appearing to be a little bit overwhelming. Maybe it's difficult to get a sense of what the key message is and what it's trying to convey. Or maybe you're just spending a little bit of time coming to the realization that it's going to take a considerable amount of effort to pull out some meaningful stories here. Now, nobody sets out to make a confusing visual. Most dashboards or graphs start out pretty simply, or certainly that's the intention of them when they're discussed initially. But over time, they may be leveraged to do more, provide more info, and support more requirements all at once. And after all that, by the time you do encounter it for the first time, if you just joined the company or maybe a new audience member, it's just thoroughly impenetrable. This continual addition of new requirements and new metrics can be classified as scope creep. And even if this new piece of insight was intended to be a one-off, often it's left and just then built upon in future months. Another byproduct of this scope creep is that inevitably, the report takes more time to build, to create, to publish because of the additional metrics that are being pushed into it each time. So that can lead to feelings of dissatisfaction from those that are building the reports. And of course, if these reports are built manually, that requires more manual updates, positioning of labels, changing data values as well, potentially. How can we tackle the challenge of scope creep and bring these overly ambitious and complicated slides back to something far more simple, more meaningful, and more impactful? Let's start off by setting up a little bit of context. The graph that you saw initially, that comprises data from a hotel chain with locations across the UK. Now, as with most analysis that's currently being conducted in the hospitality industry, a lot of the comparisons here center around a year versus the last comparable year, 2019 in this case, being the last normal year before the global pandemic. Now, the original brief of this particular graph was to easily show if there are any cities that had notable differences in room booking numbers between those 2 years, and to also assess the composition of room booking types. Now, as you can see, gradually as more and more labels and comparisons have been added, these original goals have become more difficult to identify and find. Now, one challenge that currently faces us is the chart selection. This particular diverging bar chart, which is also known as a tornado chart or butterfly chart, by the way. It allows for straightforward comparison of cities within a single year. Let's take an example. If we look at 2019, the leftward pointing bars there, you can see that London had the highest number of room bookings, followed then, if we look down, by Birmingham and then Manchester. Quite a straightforward piece of analysis there. However, comparing cities across 2 years, 2019 to 2022, is far more difficult. Without the use of the labels, if I hide those quickly, did Portsmouth book more rooms in 2019 or 2022? If we think back to our secondary goal that we had, looking at the room booking type composition, now we can see that single rooms is pretty easy to compare across city because they start from the common baseline. However, that becomes more challenging as we move forward through those different room types. Very much more difficult to achieve without referring to those data labels. So if we think about the chart selection here, we could make this initial view a little bit less overwhelming and intimidating by switching graph types. Let's change it to a grouped bar chart. This grouped bar chart now achieves a far easier comparison of each location comparing the 2 years. So for example, London in 2019 and 2022, it's very easy now to see that we had more room bookings in 2022 compared with 2019, and that can be achieved, of course, for all the cities below. We've retained the stacked bars showing the room booking composition. Now that's really just to allow our audience to get a sense that we're not deviating too far away from the original view, but we may look to change that slightly later. And if we go back to the question we posed at the beginning, looking at Portsmouth, and were room bookings greater in 2022 than they were in 2019, we can now easily identify that here. The final step we took here with this particular chart type was to be thoughtful and considerate around the sorting order that we chose. In this case, we have sorted by descending number of room bookings in 2022. And actually, as I begin to scan down this now, looking and starting off with London, I can see something appearing that possibly had or would have gone unnoticed before. The single room bookings, the blue bar here, the first blue bar in the stacks, seems to be notably down in 2022 than it was in 2019. I think that's something that's well worth investigating in a later step. So with this view, we have gained a better understanding and allowed us to make far easier comparisons. And we've also been able to uncover some interesting insights. But there's still quite a lot going on with this particular chart choice. So we can iterate further. And given our audience's interest in the overall room bookings, we might consider a visual that uses fewer colours and doesn't break the data down to such a granular level. A connected dot plot here very simply shows the two positions we're interested in. The blue dot representing 2022 and the white dot with the grey border representing 2019. And now we can easily see where there has been a variance and how much between each of the cities. And if we take a look at this particular view, we can easily identify there has been increases in bookings within London, Cardiff and Oxford, but we've seen reductions with Liverpool, Birmingham, and most noticeably, Manchester has seen a marked reduction there. Now, with the smaller hotel locations here, for example, Bristol, Newcastle, York, it's a little bit difficult to see the variances because of the scale we've got and the absolute values we're encoding. And we could solve this by not focusing on the overall absolute number of bookings, but maybe the percentage difference between the bookings in 2019 to 2022. The slope graph here provides a pretty clear emphasis on the percentage change between 2019 and 2022, and we can identify a handful of locations that have seemed to have recovered very well since the pandemic and are looking at increased hotel bookings since 2019. But on the other side of things, there are some locations that have still yet to recover, and we're seeing lower levels of bookings than we saw historically. And this particular view allows me to scan through those locations, seeing where there are increases and decreases, and note something interesting. If I was to look at those that have increased, they all seem to be in the south region, the south of England, whereas those that are still struggling to recover are all based in the north. Now, again, thinking back to the key objectives from our audience, this is a pretty critical find, and we should look to establish some updates to our hotel management in this regard. If I think back to some of the early iterations of charts that I did and some of my initial findings, I recall that London seemed to have a large decrease in single room bookings in 2022 compared with 2019. So I'm thinking we should bring that to life as well for our hotel management, maybe by way of a stacked bar chart. And because we focus on this one particular area, we've been able to sort thoughtfully and use sparing colour to really help emphasize this particular point. So having been mindful of my audience's key objectives throughout, understanding how room bookings have changed between those two periods of time, but also looking at the room booking composition, I've been able to iterate through, explore, experiment, and find two compelling stories which I think are well worth bringing to my hotel management's attention. We can bring them to life for our audience by producing a slide, maybe looking a little bit like this. Now, all of this data was present in the original visuals, but by continually revising, adding manual labels, adding different data points to it, cycles of revisions, it's become a little bit lost and difficult to find. That's not to say, of course, that there wasn't other interesting stories within that original data or different ways maybe to visualize the stories. But what we've done is focused on bringing the most valued comparisons to the attention of our audience, removing and eliminating some of the less important parts. Now, that involved exploring different chart types, having a look at the data before creating that final slide centering on those two key areas of focus. So if we take a quick look at the before and after, we've gone from something that's got a huge amount of information on it that has been added to gradually over time, but now feels a little bit difficult to even get some of the simplest trends from, to a clear story where we have two key messages that we are bringing to the attention of our audience with a recommendation on how we should progress. For more examples of visual transformations, do check out our makeover playlist on our channel. And until next time, goodbye and have a great day.